so excited for today. I have been preparing this lesson for a while because I am going to be focusing a lot more on the blood sugar component of hormone imbalance. I think that I shared with you guys in the chat that I've gotten my A1C down to a 5.9, which is super, super hard for a type 1 diabetic. And I just feel really passionate about helping people, especially because insulin resistance can really affect a lot of us. Like, I forget the statistic, but I think it's something like 70% of people with hormone imbalance, like PCOS, especially people who are close to menopausal age and postmenopausal, especially struggle with insulin resistance, the rate of type 2 diabetes. So I am really excited to be focusing a lot more on blood sugar control. The meal plan, the famous meal plan that I've been working on forever and a day, is going to be, you'll see not this one, but then more of them coming up are going to be a lot more focused on including some of the stuff we talk about today, like more protein, more fiber. That's really my goal. So you're going to see a lot more content dedicated to blood sugar control and making sure that we keep that insulin response at bay. So let's get into it. So I know for you guys, if you want to share with me, how do you feel that you have insulin resistance? Is it diagnosed? Give me your history. I personally know your history, but if you guys want to share amongst yourselves, tell me in the chat, what's your history with blood sugar response, insulin resistance? Have you been checked for it? Let's share a little bit. Was borderline, and yes, all of the symptoms. I think the symptoms, insulin resistant as of last year. And super frustrating. I'm not gonna lie, I've always said I think it's harder to deal with insulin resistance, and type 2 diabetes I think is a lot more difficult to deal with than type 1 in some ways, because for me, I can calculate my insulin according to what I need. For people who are dealing with insulin resistance and type 2, that's going to be a lot more heavily dependent on lifestyle change, how your body works with food, how your body works with stress, so it's honestly really hard. Do they test insulin resistance separate from blood sugar too? Yeah, absolutely. There are a few tests that I can put in the chat for you guys, especially when I had been exercising and changing my diet before that diagnosis. It's really hard, and there will be some people that just have idiopathic insulin resistance where you could be eating all the right things, and you're still battling it. So the idea that everybody is curable, quote unquote, doesn't always hold water, because it's not always, you're not insulin resistant because you sit around eating bonbons all day, it's part of the imbalance. So, sorry, I'm so out of breath, even more than I have been the last few weeks because of this bullshit. So bear with me if I sound like I am drowning as I do today's Zoom. But insulin resistance, let's start with, what is it? So basically, it's when your body has some crossed wires in terms of a response to the foods that you're eating and what you need to keep your blood sugars in range. Everybody that is not a type 1 diabetic releases insulin, and insulin is the hormone that converts your carbs, which is all encompassing. All sugar is carbs, right? Carbs counts if it's a bowl of pasta, if it's a piece of fruit, if it's a brownie, it doesn't matter. If it's got sugar in it, it's got carbs in it. Carbs are like the king daddy, right? So we're going to talk more about what constitutes each of those carbs, but I want you to think, like, if you're looking at a label of something, you're only going to pay attention to total carbs. Whether it has sugar in it or not is irrelevant when you're looking at insulin response, because insulin is going to respond to any carbs in that item. So insulin converts the carbs that you're eating into energy for your cells to use. It also does this to help manage blood sugar so that there's not additional spikes in your blood sugar, right? It keeps you nice and steady. So, insulin resistance is when there's some kind of crossed wire that makes you release a lot more insulin than you need. So then that in turn ends up dropping your blood sugars too far. When that happens, your liver will then kick in with a glucose storage. And then the glucose brings your blood sugars back up to keep you from going too low. So this constant back and forth between the insulin and the glucose from your liver is supposed to keep you within a certain ideal range. Now, you might have seen or heard of the A1C test. I've mentioned it. I mentioned it in the chat that my A1C is lower. You might have been tested your A1C by the doctor. You might have been told your A1C is fine, right? But you might have all the symptoms of insulin resistance. The reason for this is because the A1C is basically a 3-month or so average of all of your blood sugars. So let's think about this. If you're having an intense response to food, your body is releasing a lot more insulin than it needs, you drop low, and then your body kicks in with liver glucose to raise you up high, that you're going to average out. You're not going to see on average the A1C average because they equal out. You're not going to see that you ran lows or that you spike high after eating. You're not going to get that specific idea, that picture of what's happening, because they're all going to equal out. That's why I don't like an A1C test as a measure for insulin resistance, because I don't think that it gives enough of a specific view of how your body is handling the carbs that you're eating. Does that make sense so far? Did I lose anyone yet? Makes sense? Okay, cool. If at any point in here you're like, I have no idea what you're talking about, tell me. I will not be offended. Okay, and I'll go back over it. So here's the other kicker with this. When your body responds, like, who here has cravings? Who here experiences intense carb cravings or sugar cravings? Especially if it's, oddly enough, after you've already eaten. And you're like, what's wrong with me? Like, I was full an hour ago. Why am I like exhausted and craving sweets? Especially at nighttime. Typically because our carbiest meal will be at night, like dinner time, right? And that's when we're doing least activity and stuff like that. So when your blood sugars drop because you're releasing too much insulin, you're going to crave sugar and carbs because your body is going to think that you need them to bring your blood sugars back up. It's an automatic mechanism that if you drop too much or you have too big of an insulin load, you're going to need those carbs to be accounted for by that insulin. So if Katrina, I was told I wasn't insulin resistant. That's what I was saying about the A1C, is because if they're going based on, and not everybody is insulin resistant. The annoying thing is the symptoms of insulin resistance are more intense, but you could have a lot of those symptoms and have PCOS, you could have different types of PCOS, which I can definitely get into with you, that don't even show up on blood work. It's really tricky, but I'll ask you if you can text me the tests that you've had done already and how long ago you had them done. And then I could tell you what's missing. But if you're noticing your cravings, if you're releasing too much insulin, it's your body's way of wanting you to bring your blood sugars back up. But the problem is that your liver will kick in with that glucose I'm talking about, which is sugar, to bring you up. So, but it'll be after you've already had that craving. So typically what we'll do is we'll give, like, I don't want to say give in, because that denotes some kind of like lack of discipline, and that's not what it is. If you have a sugar craving because of insulin, it's like survival mode craving, so I don't want you to think I'm making it seem like you give in, but you fulfill, let's say, that craving, you fulfill that, and then you've eaten that sugar, those carbs, and then your body kicks in with glucose. That raises your blood sugar higher. Whenever your blood sugar is higher, your body releases insulin to bring you back down. But if you have insulin resistance, you release too much insulin. So it becomes a vicious cycle of going between up and down and cravings and fulfilling cravings, and that's why you feel, if you do, you feel out of control. Like, that's why blood sugar control is so important, because it ends up keeping you in that mid-range without needing the extra insulin. The other thing is that insulin is an androgenic hormone. So if you have androgenic PCOS, you're adding more androgenic hormones to your body when you already have an abundance of androgenic hormones. So this could lead to symptoms like weight gain, acne, hair loss, facial hair hirsutism, all of the classic hallmark symptoms that we hate. Even if you don't meet all of the criteria for straight up PCOS, you can still have symptoms from your insulin resistance. This is why I feature Hashimoto's and PCOS. And a lot of my clients will be like, well, I was told my periods are fine. I don't have cysts. I don't have PCOS, but I have hirsutism, weight gain, or stubborn weight. I have my weight's in the top half, all of those hallmark symptoms that are classic with insulin resistance or an abundance of insulin. So that's why it's so important to keep our blood sugars controlled, because it eliminates a lot of variables that can cause a lot of symptoms. So, okay. Suzu, am I seeing a list of baby steps you added, or? Okay, we're gonna talk about that. Because I want to make sure you're not overdoing the baby steps too. I love that. I stopped all sugar, which is helpful for insulin resistance for sure. I stopped eating after dinner. Not necessary. We'll talk about that. But it's what you're eating after dinner, which also has to do with the step today we'll talk about. I lean towards protein and veggies as suggested for insulin resistance. Lost almost 5 pounds. That's huge. And you know me, I'm not about like, I just need to lose weight for bikini season. But if you're gaining weight or you're holding on to weight because of a hormonal abundance, there's nothing wrong with saying, like, if I switch those things and I've lost weight, that's a good sign, It's the intent that matters. So I just want to make sure you're not overdoing it either. We'll go over it. Type 2 diabetes, great A1Cs, still getting highs and lows all day. So this makes more sense. It's that roller coaster, It's super frustrating. They were baby steps we talked about. Okay, good. I want to make sure you're just not overdoing it. I crave the sweets. I gained 20 pounds since last year. The cravings will get you. And it's not like some moral failing. It's not just like I could go for some ice cream. It's like a deep, I need to have something sweet or I cannot sleep kind of feeling. And that's hormonal, So that's a huge indicator that there's highs and lows, So I think that's really important to look at. Okay. So what's next on my list here? So I always recommend that people, and I can link my Amazon storefront. You can get whatever one you want, but I can link my Amazon storefront where I have some suggestions of ones. Basically, get the cheapest blood sugar monitor you can find, because the technology is all the same. So the efficacy, the accuracy, I should say, is going to be the same, but you find a cheap glucose monitor. And I recommend that everybody, especially if I'm working with someone, before I'm going to tell them, like, if they're not diagnosed insulin resistant, I almost am weary to give them like a super low carb regimen. I won't do that unless I know they're insulin resistant. Now, should you be eating like a ton of carbs if you have hormonal issues? Not necessarily, unless you're like a marathon runner. But I will always suggest trying to get some blood sugars, because again, if that A1C, if everything's averaging out, you're not seeing how your body is responding to carbs. I could have someone that they stay at 98 all day, and insulin resistance is not a part of what they're dealing with. And then Why would we look at carbs so intently, you know? Or you could have someone that unknowingly is bouncing up and down all over the place and everyone sees fine. So I suggest that everyone takes a little bit of time to get some really good blood sugars, get some good data, I should say, about their blood sugars. And what I suggest you do is you get your monitor and you're going to do a couple different tests. And I will put this with this video as well, or I could put it in the chat. But I think I would suggest that you do. I hope Anne can join us again because I want her to hear this part, but I'll text her. I would suggest that you do as soon as you wake up. So fasting blood sugar. Okay, welcome back, Anne. I'm excited you're here for this part. Okay, so I would suggest you get a cheap monitor and you get some blood sugars. We're going to do fasting blood sugar when you first wake up. That kind of gives an indication maybe of what happened overnight. And some people have what's called dawn phenomenon, which they're higher in the morning just because. That's still important for us to see because it sets the tone for the day. Then I would want to see before a carby meal, and then at least an hour to 2 hours after a carby meal to see what your blood sugars are doing after. I'm gonna put this in the chat. Okay, we got fasting when you wake up. We got before carby meal, 1 to 2 hours after carby meal. This one's big. Whenever you feel off, if you feel sluggish, if you feel super moody out of nowhere, like you feel like you could cry or bite someone's head off, like not that I'm diminishing whether or not you would have a reason to feel that way, but you know yourself. If it feels like so intense it washes over you and it comes out of nowhere, that's a time I would test. If you feel like you cannot keep your eyes open all of a sudden, if you get like a super bad craving, anytime you feel off, I would test. Before bed, and if this is a big one, if you randomly wake up at night, extra points if you wake up hungry, because that could be a sign that you're running a low blood sugar or your blood sugars are off or something's going on. And I would do this for a few days. If you want to take it a step further, I would do this when you're off, if you have a cycle still, I would do it when you're off your period. And then I would do a day or two when you're on your period. So you can also compare and see if during your period you tend to be more insulin resistant and it affects your blood sugars or not. Now, this kind of sucks if you're not like, if I don't know anyone that's like, yay, needles, unless it's your thing, I'm not going to judge you. But, if you're having a hard time with the idea of having to prick your finger for this, text me. I'll walk you through it. We can FaceTime the first time that you do it so that you feel supported. You're not alone. I can definitely help you. I got like no fingerprints left, so I'm your girl. I can definitely help you through this. Some people ask about a CGM, which is a continuous glucose monitor, which you insert it. It's like very thin, like you don't feel it really. And it just continuously checks your blood sugars. Those are pricey, to be honest. Especially if you're not going through insurance. If you have a doctor who's willing to prescribe you a CGM, it still can be a little pricey, like at least $100. So, but the monitors on Amazon, I think you can find it for like $20, and I think you get like 100 strips or something, like glucose strips to test. So it's really up to you. And the CGM can sometimes be a little inaccurate at times, at least from what I found, compared to good old testing your blood through your finger. So there's different options. You can definitely text me and we can talk about it more thoroughly. Any questions so far on that part? Is this making sense? My son has Dexcom 7. Yep, me too. So he's type 1, so insurance covers it, but it's brought his A1C from 10s to 7.1. It's definitely great for insight. Before getting pregnant, I loved my Dexcom. It just became really inaccurate for all of the swings that I was having. So I've literally, oh my God, I'm gonna send you a picture, Susan, after this. The doctors here freaking love me because I test my finger. I test like every hour, basically, and then twice overnight. It's been crazy. Because it just wasn't coming up accurate with my Dexcom. It was like 50 to 60 points off at any given time. And it would tell me that I'm like devastatingly low. And it would be like, you're 48, drink sugar, like blaring at me. And I would test with my finger because I feel fine. And I would be like 115. So I just decided to say, screw it. And I've just been testing my blood sugar with my fingers like around the clock. It's been intense. So, okay. Now we got why to test your sugars, what to test, like when to test and stuff like that. Now I'm going to give you some tips into how, oh, and his arm. I've actually never done that before. I've always just done my fingers. I wonder if that would hurt less or at least give my fingers a break. I always joke. I'm like, I could kill someone. I got no fingerprints left. You can't even find me, the boogeyman. But the arm is interesting. Okay, so let's go over some tips on how, and this is just good to implement in general. None of the tips I'm going to give you are going to be all that extreme, like I'm not, you know me by now. I'm not going to tell you to cut shit entirely out of your life, but this is going to be helpful, I think, in general, when you're dealing with hormone imbalance. These are good rules of thumb. Okay. So, number one, you might have heard this before. You might be like, oh, groundbreaking, but pair your carbs with a protein and ideally some fiber. This is important because your body responds with insulin based on what's in your stomach, what you're eating, and you might have heard of glycemic index. I think I have a whole Zoom dedicated to glycemic index that I could bump after this. I'll just go and bump it on the page. And I'm pretty sure, I'm like 99% sure it's on Spotify as well. But what glycemic index is it's how your body responds to the food you're eating. Pairing potato chips with cheese stick was honestly revolutionary. Yes, it's not that far from charcuterie. I love that. That sounds really good right now, actually. That was my dinner yesterday. It was tortilla chips and cheddar cheese. It was so good. But pairing your carbs with protein and fiber. If you're just eating straight up carb, especially if it's something that is really easy to break down, like sugar or something like white bread, there's not a whole lot of substance to it. It's just pretty carb dense, or like straight up corn, let's say, things like that. Your body is going to digest it really fast. And when it digests it really fast, it's going to hit it with insulin really fast. And remember, if you have that crossed wire where your body responds with too much insulin, which kicks off this whole cycle, it gives you too much insulin, which causes those symptoms we were talking about because you have an abundance of androgenic hormones now. We want to slow that down. And now, without tangenting too far, the reason that medications, which I get questions about this all the time. I can do a whole other Zoom on it when I have a little more strength. But the topic of semaglutides, or GLP-1 injections, like Wegovy, Ozempic, Mounjaro, right? They started out as diabetic medication. And the way they work is it slows digestion down. It slows the process of digestion down. So if in doing so, it allows your body more time to react with insulin. Now, I don't think the method in which they're being used by everybody and their mother is the best thing to do. I don't think it's good to be used solely for weight loss. Again, that's the whole other Zoom we can get into, and I have a lot of reasons for that, not to judge. But the method that they were invented, or the reason they were invented for diabetes purposes, is because it's meant to allow your body time to break down and respond with insulin. You can do that when you add fiber and protein to the food that you're eating. If you take your time eating, you give it time to, you give yourself time to digest. If you've ever heard of mindful eating, where you're eating slower, all of these things can also give your body time to respond with insulin without you necessarily needing to go down a path that has a large commitment attached to it. So it's nature's Ozempic, I guess, is eating things that are going to slow your digestion down. So that would be high fiber, high protein things, because your body is going to break those things down first. And they're going to take longer to break down than a simple carbohydrate. Like, oatmeal is a tricky topic because it has a ton of carb to it. And so some people, it really does drive their blood sugars nuts. But if you've seen that big viral thing where it's like nature's Ozempic, and it's just like, it's oatmeal. All right, social media is such an annoying world these days with like its buzzwords and stuff, but that's what they were calling oatmeal for a while. Why? Because there's tons of fiber in it, and because your body has to break it down slowly. So pairing your carb with protein is going to give your body time to respond. It's not going to give you a big burst of insulin, like as if it was just solely carbs. And that's really going to be helpful for blood sugars. It's going to keep you nice and level. So that's number one. The timing of your carbs. The timing of your carbs is really important, because if you think about it, carbs are not the enemy here. We want to be smart about how we're utilizing them. Standard American diet is we're eating our carbiest biggest meal at night, when it makes sense. We have more time at night, our work is done, we're home, we're very accustomed to foods that are dinner-like foods, just happening to have more carbs. It's homier, it's more comforting, it's satiating, all of those things. But you're eating carbs when you're the least active, just because at the end of the day, you're not requiring as much of your body. So if insulin is meant to be released to break down those carbs for utilization for energy, and there is no expenditure of energy to go with it, you have no reason for that insulin to be released the way it is. And then that's going to give you, again, you're going to have that overabundance of insulin. You're going to have a drop, which is going to make you crave more carbs, more sugar. That's why it typically happens at night. And then you're going to go to bed, and you're going to have nothing but excess insulin and carbs in your system. And then that is what leads to excess weight, digestion issues, poor sleep overnight, which then affects your hormones the next day. It kind of becomes this slippery slope. So the timing of your carbs is super important. If you've ever gotten the baby step from me or from the coaches to front load your carbs, to be eating more of your carbs during the beginning part of the day than the end of the day, it's because you're likely to utilize those carbs in the beginning part of the day, because they're meant for energy. Again, it's not the enemy, especially if you're pairing those carbs with some protein. So that's a huge one. Front load your carbs. I have tons of ideas. If you're like, but I don't know what to eat at night, I can give you tons of ideas to replace your sides and just flip it around. Or just, I know this is weird, but whatever sides you would have at night, save for the next day for lunch and just warm it up. Eat that the next day instead. I'm weird with leftovers. It has to be made into something completely different than what it was the night prior. That's also part of the meal plan. But text me. We can come up with a game plan together if you need help front loading your carbs more. Number 3, replacing high carb and high sugar items. Now, if you eat something high carb and high sugar, is it the end of the freaking world? No. But should you know that, especially if you have insulin resistance, that you might not feel well the rest of that night? Yeah. Should it be every night that you do this? If you want to see a difference in like your weight, your energy, some of those hormonal symptoms like skin and hair and stuff like that, is that the best bet? No. But again, what are you never going to go to a birthday party at night? Never have some birthday cake? So I'm going to say this, but also saying that that's the balance of life. If you want results for the rest of your life, if you're going to hold yourself to a standard that you're always going to be perfect, you're going to be beating yourself up and binging at some point. So I think that there is a balance to this one. But if you find sugar-free or low carb substitutes that you actually like, then it's a win-win. Why wouldn't you be excited? Why wouldn't you just go for that? Because 9 times out of 10, if you go for that, the one time you don't, who gives a shit? You're gonna be fine because it balances out. It's not one meal that's gonna do you in, but if you are always feeling like, oh, it's either the cake or the apple. An apple will never be cake and it's carbs anyway. You know what I mean? Finding a sugar-free decadent treat or a low carb bread that you really like and still eating bread. Like the meal plan I'm going to put out has like garlic bread in it on low carb bread, but like you should still look forward to it. It's still good. It's still yummy. It's going to help with that balance so that, you have your options. It's never about thinking about it as I'm taking things away. You want to think about it as I'm including so many options that sometimes I'm going to go for the ones that are sugar-free or low carb, and sometimes I'm not. And overall, that's going to equal out to me being lower carb or lower sugar versus this idea of carbs are the enemy, cannot have it, which inevitably will fail at some point. We're all human. Can I ask you, as sorry, guys. I'm like, I feel like I sound like I'm nervous, but I'm not. I promise. It's just preeclampsia, Um, can I ask you as a dessert idea, sugar-free Cool Whip, 1 scoop of protein powder, sugar-free syrup, and nuts and freeze. Sounds like a great idea, especially if you like it. You can even take it a step further because I don't know, that reminds me of like if you go like if you get put peanuts and stuff like that, you can even get like sugar-free chocolate chips, melt that down, drizzle that over the top, and it's like giving Snickers kind of. I don't know, something stuck out in my head as like frozen Snickers. Um, Especially that you can get sugar-free caramel from or caramel, however you prefer to say it. I really like the Chalk Zero sugar-free caramels. And you can add that to it with some melted chocolate. It could be really delicious. I'm also a big fan, like I hate portions. Like I hate portion control. I never tell people serving sizes because I would rather have something that I don't have to think about. Like I know it's sugar free, I know it's low carb, I know I can eat until I'm satisfied with it and it's still going to be low sugar, low carb. I would rather do that than think, let me have a little bit of it because I don't know, the way my brain works, I'm going to immediately want more. Like it's just, I don't know if anyone can relate, but the second someone tells me how much to have, I either hyperfixate on it and then eventually give up, or I am just dissatisfied. And it like pisses me off. And I just don't like having to think about it. I don't like having to think about macros. I don't like having to think about like how much is in that. Like that's why I'm like, you find something yummy, you find it low carb and low sugar, you're golden. And then life is great, you know? And it helps balance out. I love talking dessert ideas. This meal plan I'm sending you guys, I know I've been talking a big game, but today was crazy. Like I said in the voice note, I was finally like on point to get this done. The demand avoidance was lifted. I had ideas for recipes. You'll see. I don't know if you guys can hear the alarm going off, but ignore that. I was full of ideas. I was like, let's friggin' do this. And then I had a preeclamptic episode today. And then after that, I'm honored, but I'm like very close with my nurses and stuff. So, and the doctors, and they just been chatting me up today. So every time I sat down to write this out, I would get wrapped up in a conversation with someone, or I was like, there was a point where they like made me lay down and not look at my phone for hours today. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. But the recipes that I'm going to be giving you for this week's meal plan, there are so many in there. So I'm really excited for it. And like I said, it's a lot more focused on like high protein, more fiber, lower carb, you know. But if there's ever like a craving that you have, and you're like, hey, how can I make this craving low carb? How can I make this craving sugar free? Message me or text me and we can brainstorm, because I love doing that. I love finding workarounds. That is literally how I got my A1C lower, how I lost my weight initially before this kid. Like it's how I'll do it again after this kid's born, is by eating really delicious things that just agree with my body and with balance, and sometimes having things that, are indulgences, and that's fine. So definitely text me and we can brainstorm up some yummy stuff. That's just my favorite thing. Okay. And then lastly, last tip of the night is activity after eating. This doesn't have to mean that you're running a mile after you eat. God, I did not get the running gene. Like, I'm not a running kind of girl. I will never be. I don't want to say I envy people who are runners, but I'm amazed by people who enjoy running, because it is just not me. I don't like it. So, but what does it mean? It means after eating, do some stretches, do some lunges, do, like just do some dips, some seated dips. If you want, go for a light walk if weather allows for it or you feel like it. You can make it fun. You can get a little trampoline. They used to be cheap before COVID, and then everyone started using them and working out at home. But you can, oh, Becca, you were forced to run today and puked. I'm so sorry. That sounds like torture. I hate that for you. I could not imagine a job that forces me to run. Listen, I don't know what happens if you like mouth off to someone in the military, because that's what would happen to me. I would be like, paperwork. I swear to God, I always joke. I'm like, I'd be the first one on the wall if this was Handmaid's Tale. Like, I cannot. So, especially let someone tell me to run. You got a gun? Because if you don't, I ain't running. But I'm so sorry for you. Yeah, you can get like a little trampoline. That's one of my favorite ways to get activity in. It's also really great for lymphatic drainage and moving everything around. Don't go jumping on a trampoline right after eating because you may throw up. But just like bobbing around a little bit, put some headphones in. It's like such a good, I don't want to say workout, but like it's just really good activity. The reason for that is because again, the insulin's meant to convert your carbs into energy. So if you expend energy after eating, you help utilize that insulin. So you're not having so much lingering insulin, which again is excess androgens floating around, causing those symptoms. So even just a walk, some jumping jacks, if you don't have a trampoline, you can do jump rope for a little, and just like a little bit. You don't need a lot. Tips on managing acid reflux while trying to be active after eating. Maybe don't do the trampoline. I would say something mild then, like a very leisurely walk, if you can do that. Where also helpful is that you're upright, you know? Um, so I would probably avoid doing any like floor exercises or anything like that. Um, Overall, acid reflux is a bitch. Maybe I could do a Zoom on that because it's been a while since I talked about stomach acid. That just reminded me, because low stomach acid and high stomach acid wreaks havoc on us hormonals. So that's actually a really good idea. I'm going to put that. Hold on. Next week. Stomach acid. What a fun topic. Yummy. Okay. But yeah, I would not focus on not jolting the upper part of your body all that much right after. Make sure you're staying upright. Trying to think what other exercises could be good. I would probably say walking would be your best bet. You can get like if you can't you don't live in an area that's conducive to go walking after you're eating, even if it's just like around the block. You just want to kind of you don't want to burn off your food. You want to kind of spark the process of utilizing energy, right? Like a little kickstart. So even if you just go walk around the block, that's going to be helpful. But let's say you live somewhere that's not conducive for doing that, or the weather is crap, or it's too hot, it's unbearable, whatever. You can look on Facebook Marketplace. People are getting rid of their walking pads all the time and get like a cheap, oops, just dropped my laptop. You get like a cheap at-home walking pad. That could be helpful. Yeah, I would say that's probably going to be the safest bet if you have really bad reflux. Okay, any other questions? I want to know before we go, if you have questions, let me know. If you need advice on anything, let me know. But if you don't, I would like to know, what part of today do you feel like was the biggest takeaway, most groundbreaking, most helpful? I'm a feedback queen. I want to make sure me huffing and puffing up here was worth it for you guys. Let me know, what was your biggest takeaway from today before we jump? That insulin resistance and blood sugars can be tested separately. Yeah. One does not always denote the other. How to front load the carbs and how our bodies process sugars. Isn't it so interesting? It's not about it being the enemy. It's just about using it and utilizing it way smarter, and seeing how our body responds to it on a chemical level. And I feel like it helps emotionally too, where it doesn't just feel like it's just something I'm not allowed to have. You feel like more armed to be like, I'm going to work smarter, not harder, you know? It separates it from the emotion, and it's more like it's just data. This is all just data to know what's in stuff and how our body utilizes it or doesn't. Prioritizing fiber. Yeah, it's super helpful. It's super helpful. I mean, and also aside from the whole like helping you poop thing, which is good, it also just slowing down the digestive process in a healthy way, I think it's really helpful for us, for sure. And it helps you feel fuller and more satiated longer. And there's also studies that show it helps with cholesterol, which those of us, contrary to belief, it's not because you're eating a lot of egg yolks. People who have high inflammation or have thyroid issues, autoimmune disorders, will always have higher cholesterol than people who don't. And fiber helps regulate that. So maybe I'll do a Zoom on fiber too. I'm getting ideas today. We all need help pooping. Pooping's a great thing. It is a great thing, especially if we're like doing it just the right amount, you know? Pooping's wonderful. And on that note, I hope everyone has a great rest of your week. I posted the meal plan items in the chat. Tomorrow, you guys are going to get your recipes and your ingredient list. And I will post it on the page so you guys can start doing the whole meals of the month thing that I discussed on the last Zoom, or 2 Zooms ago. I don't even know anymore. If you have any questions, you need any help, you want any ideas for recipes, feel free to text me, and I will definitely help you out. Okay, so thanks for tuning in. Have a good night. Bye.